this process of reaching where we were supposed to be at now started a long time ago, from the old Federation, Caribbean Free Trade Area, the establishment of a common market, the Grand Anne's Declaration that decided we should go further than the common market. And then in 2001, the revised treaty, which included the new commitments on the right to provide a service and the right to establish in Caribbean countries. We talked earlier about, in other Caricom countries, we talked about Jamaica and our experience and the possibility of establishing. Just to say, as you know, there are so many different ways of establishing a commercial presence, and the CSME is supposed to provide the opportunity for you to do so easily in another country. But as your example, Gerard, as your example indicated, there are a lot of other elements that go into implementing this particular right of establishment. Some of the unfinished business in the region has to do with a regional company registry. So if you're registered in Trinidad and Tobago, should you need to register in Jamaica in order to provide the service, they're moving towards a regional registry. There are other restrictions on capital movement that still need to be addressed. A few countries still have exchange controls in place. There are other issues with respect to capital movement that need to be addressed at the national level in order to ensure that the provisions.
And what I'm saying is standardization across the board, because remember there are commitments, international commitments, each country across the board has to reach in order not to be blacklisted because of, like we have our FIU as business emergency starting, that unit, right?
Yep.
And I think the problem with that is that everyone has to be on the same page at the same level, because at the end of the day, in order to facilitate something like what, like the registries and things like that, that I think is an important aspect of, before we can reach, easy access and the establishment of companies, a company registry across the board.
Right.
Everyone has to be on the same page. Must be on that level. I think some countries aren't at that level.
Yeah, so they've signed on to a regional commitment that you're not ready to implement nationally. So on this FIU matter then, so we've got to wait forever. We shouldn't be too positive because in Guyana, the opposition is preventing the passage of the legislation. So,
at the end of the day, it will have international consequences against Guyana. You know what I'm saying? Because we don't want to be marketed as or backlisted, or something like that. So we have to ensure that our commitments are met. So but we have to be careful also how we engage in because if you are not properly put in place all your necessary all your necessary regulations then, or regulatory bodies, and I have my regulatory bodies, you can impact on my regulation, which can make me seem as having the regulatory authorities and all that, but having a back door where someone could use Guyana to pass through into Trinidad because of, that could happen.
Exactly.
I don't want like regulation, like we have the FIU, because remember there are certain commitments that all countries have signed, right? And there's something now coming with the US banking system, which will become soon, where you have to make certain checks and certain information flow, right? Because between ourselves, and I think that's with the US, but also internationally, there's certain commitments where to stem things like money laundering and things like that. That's why we are. Well, is it under the A? I'm not even sure.
No, this is a new reporting requirements.
No, reporting.
Can I wait on this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, that is actually one of the things that our NEM deals with in terms of anti-money laundering. We basically do consultancy work for different listed businesses and financial institutions. And I guess what she's trying to say is basically that there is this world organization, this world body called FATF, Financial Action Task Force. And under FATF, they are the one that will regulate the financial transactions, I guess, between countries and whatnot. So what she's saying is that basically that if it is you're not with FATF, you're against FATF, basically. No. Well, you're saying in terms of Guyana not having...
What I'm saying is that if you're not with FATCA, if your country's regulations are not where it's supposed to be, that would be a black mark against your country, according to
Yes.
FATA. But
Yes.
if I am like that, I am in place, like we are trying in Trinidad, as you will be aware, we are trying to put certain regulatory bodies and certain laws in place
Right.
to meet our commitments. But if if we are dealing with another country like Guyana, which is not in place, it will affect us because we will be looking like a back door. You understand?
Yes, that's what I'm getting. And I'm saying that because Trinidad was on the grey list. We didn't reach the blacklist status as yet, but we was on the grey list, right? And
So Guyana now is on the gray or blacklist?
I believe they're on the grey, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure
Okay.
on it. But there are other countries that are definitely blacklisted. Those are countries that if it is you do business with them, trading or anything like that, you yourself will become, well, as she said, it will be used as a backdoor. And then your financial and your credibility would be affected, right? One of the ways that this could affect us is basically not just as a country, but as individuals. For instance, if you are traveling, your credit cards and all of these things now will be under scrutiny, right? So in order to keep yourself and at large Trinidad and Tobago, the country that you're working with, out of this scrutiny, we have to just do business with other countries that follow the same regulations and whatnot. And
So what about the company who has a business in Guyana?
yes, investments, anything to deal with any transaction like that. Yeah, so in terms of the establishment and things like that, you also need to be very cautious and aware of who it is you're doing business with. Because sometimes that kind of business could actually be detrimental to you. Yeah, in a whole. So instead of you might be saying, well, Guyana might have everything that I need in order for me to propel my business. In the end, it wouldn't be a smart move because you are actually incorporating yourself into things that could be led to money laundering and terrorist financing and all of these things. And that is not something you want to be associated with.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to these agreements, this speaks to the right to regulate, the right to countries to take regulations like that once they're non-discriminatory. And also it speaks to all the other ancillary elements that have to be in place in order to benefit from some of these trade agreements. So that's why at the beginning I said they're important, but they're not the be-all and end-all. But they certainly can provide a helping hand. But all these elements impact on the implementation of the CSME and indeed any type of agreement. So, we have these rights relating to the establishment within the CSME. But we can engage in on-wage earning, create and manage enterprises, but of course they are affected, as we've just been discussing, by some of the national national environment in which we seek to operate. Unfinished business, as I mentioned, regional registration, but also the matter of contingent rights. Some people might, if they're married, want to take their spouse along with them if they go to work and to set up a company in another Caribbean country. It's quite possible. We don't have rules for that. We don't have rules related to spouses or children who accompany you with an investment. So it obviously that is seriously a challenge for the implementation of the right to establishment. We've been moving very slowly in this area. And we also have the right to provide services within the Caribbean community. At the 3 years after 2001, by 2005 actually, January 2005, member states should have removed all restrictions on the right of Trinidad and Tobago National to provide service within the rest of the CSME. In the event there are still restrictions, they were supposed to identify those measures that are discriminatory and then eliminate them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I'm going to facilitate the work in terms of that would be covered by that?
Yeah. Non-wage, so nobody is paying you a wage. You can be paid a fee, but not a wage. Non-wage earning means that you're not necessarily not entering the labor market. No, it's different. Are you a lawyer? Sorry, but you know. You don't. For you, it's not a difference. Right, but if you're employed with the firm. Right, but if you were employed with Neil and Massey as a lawyer in another country, in Guyana, say, you would be earning a wage.
Well, then it depends on your manner of employment. If I am a lawyer in private practice, obviously I talk about my fee.
Right.
So I mean,
So a lawyer in private practice, you have absolutely
as opposed to a lawyer who is working with probably a company, we talk about
who earns a wage. That's right.
So if you say engage in non-wage earning activities, that is why we will have a little concept, and you talk about a fee, we will smile about it, because I could be a lawyer and say I'm doing a transaction for somebody who is given it from them, and I'm doing it.
So you're paid a fee.
I'm paid a fee because I'm in private practice, so I send you my register for my fee.
Mm-hmm.
But if you suppose I'm working with a company and you're doing a transaction for another thing, and
Then that wouldn't fit into this right of establishment.
yeah, I'll be paying out with the fee because it's it.
Whether you work or not.
Mike.
So if you're employed in a company, and we all know it, sorry, you're employed, let's say, and no disrespect, at the post office, let's say, you do absolutely nothing, you dreadful customer service and so on, you still earn your wage, because they can't fire you, as we know. So a wage earner is somebody who is paid for time, in essence, being on the job, whereas a fee, it would be paid for professional services. So if I do deliver a training program, I get a fee, but I could still get a wage from my company. The company would charge a fee for the training, and I get my salary, so that they are different and classified as.
Doesn't a wage imply the connotation of something regular, as opposed to address a particular action? Your fee, but it's not a wage. Do they employ you? They contract you. Mm-hmm.
Company bills for the fee.
Right. Right. So I'm contracting you to do certain services for me. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At that level, but what about all the other elements of employment, such as Social Security, right? The payment into like a national insurance scheme, that kind of stuff. That's where they move into the wage earning element. Yeah, but we know that, but they're supposed to. Yeah. Say that again. I don't think a lot of people got you.
It was a challenge to that. I remember in the United States with Red Cross workers that responded to the Haitian disaster.
Uh-huh.
And they were earning fees. They were not getting wages because they were not being employed. So that, I guess, a non-wage earning activity made for that category made one where, especially with the CSME, some like the emergency responders from Trinidad to St. Vincent or wherever may be where that category.
It's a live issue. I mean, one of my partners recently provided advice to an international company which had an establishment in a non-Caricom country and was trying to make some changes to its employment within that Caricom country. And he needed to identify which of the workers were actually wage earners and which were, say, providing specific services. And this is an international company whose products are distributed in that particular country. So you need to determine which is which. They were saying, of course, for their purposes, it's best to say that these people were providing a service and were being paid a fee. Right. As opposed to being employed by the company. So yeah, it's a continuing issue. And as I say, work for certain consultants in the region. Professional service. So yeah, we also, again, moving to the mode 4. We also agreed under Article 45 to provide freedom of movement. Now, people tend to think that means full freedom of movement for everybody, and it doesn't. only specific categories, and not everybody. We started off with, I think, 5 categories: university graduates, entertainers, sports persons, etc. Even at the beginning, not every Caricom country accepted that all those categories would benefit from free movement. And even if, and now as a couple of us at Trinidad and Tobago in particular has tried to expand it into domestics and uncertain kinds of unskilled labor, not everybody. What, you're shaking your head? You don't agree?
No, I don't think it was supposed to be like for.
But the question that a lot of the labor unions asked, and they asked when the CSME was being developed, and subsequently, but why? Why the discrimination against unskilled persons? Oh, it's on. It was on. It was.
I think it was free movement of skilled labor because that where there's a need within the Caricom, rather than going out of the Caribbean, you get it. But unskilled labor, you know, the type of jobs that unskilled labor come, is there a deficit?
Yes.
Is there?
Yes, and right now.
There is a deficit maybe because at the end of the day, some of us can pay less money for the unskilled labor that come from outside. Okay. In other words, there are certain jobs that Trinidadians wouldn't take because of what is being paid for it.
Yes.
But if those jobs were better paid, locals will take it.
But
Right?
aren't they being
Right,
paid
because
the wage? At least the minimum wage?
They don't take it, they do CPEP or URP. That's why we can't get them to work in the supermarkets, the restaurants.
And not only
Rituals
that,
and pizza
the-
boys.
Are
have
you
to
saying
bring in
that was
Guyanese
above
people
the
to work.
The manufacturers complain a
minimum
lot.
wage? Because
They do
we,
meet the minimum wage. They are paid above the minimum wage. There's a tiny percentage of jobs in this country that are paid on the minimum wage. You know, most are above. Most are above, even in supermarkets and restaurants. We cannot find people for any of those stores. The average tenure in a Rituals or a Pizza Boys is 7 days. 7 days after you've trained, and because they won't work the shifts, they don't want to do the customer service, they don't like the hours, and so on. And so, where do you get people from? You have to go to Guyana, Barbados, St. Lucia, and bring them in.
And that's a good
Trinis
example.
won't do the
Rituals
work.
have actually done, that's what
Yeah,
Rituals
Rituals
has done.
has employed Guyanese people to do work because Trinis won't. It's not that they have other jobs, you know, they won't do it. They rather stay home than do it.
I think I would want to disagree because I think at the end of the day, if you treat your workers correctly, I'm not saying Rituals don't, but you can't tell me I'm paying you just above the minimum wages, and what you are paying me can't get me to the grocery at the end of the month. Let's be real. If someone is willing to take a 10 days every quarter in CPEP and be able to live on that, then we need to ask, what are we paying out there?
Well, because
there are professionals who in this country who get trouble going to the groceries, and they are professionals. And if their salary are supposed to be so-called middle class, then how are the other side surviving? Let's be real. We can't afford, because at the end of the day, we can't afford to, to maintain. We are maintaining our standard of living, but our workers below, they don't want to live because we must maintain our standards. So the harder things come, we will maintain our standards. So we are going to push for higher prices, which some of us can afford. Who can't afford, well, say what?
So why shouldn't some of these persons who you're talking about, why shouldn't they be able to go to Barbados or Guyana or Jamaica and work?
Yes, and those persons are coming here. Why are they coming here then?
Because
because what they're getting in Guyana
wage.
and saying may be better, what we're getting here may be better than what they're receiving there, but it doesn't say our standards are better.
No, that's standards.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say is that if we treat workers, there are people who do domestic workers, and they are with their employers for years and years. And when you ask, about why do you stay? Obviously because they are treated, at a certain level. And anything, not because, and also I would like to also say that sometimes, and not because someone is doing a domestic job, sometimes it's how we treat people. Even in our offices, people complain. I work in the government office, and we have all levels of class. We have professionals, non-professionals, we have guards, we have the messengers, and sometimes they come, they say, they don't talk to me, some of the lawyers, they don't talk to me, they don't say good morning. And people, and you may say, well, what? You don't tell me good morning, but then you say, well, you're a lawyer, it doesn't matter to you. But for another class of workers, that is important because in their mind, how you treat me is how you think about me. And that's a reality.
So
Okay,
that's
and these
exactly
people get a full paid job and they're working and doesn't matter, they will still get a wage or the salary, whatever you want to put it as, at the end of the month. But for them, these little factors make a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
But you know, that's exactly the view expressed by the Caribbean Council of Labor when they were asking member states to expand the categories.
Sorry, then you have the legislation like the Truck Act, which allows a certain amount of circumventing of the employment rules that,
Right. Yeah. It's a live discussion because Stacey attends meetings of the Cont'd for the chamber, and it continually rises, no, Stacey? The inclusion of additional categories. And why should certain categories be excluded? I feel that there'll be a burden on
yeah,
social
I think that may be another aspect of it. Why too? Because at the end of the day, professionals it's assumed that skilled workers can afford, well, they are less likely to be a burden. This is my opinion, I could be wrong, than lower categories.
Yeah. Well, that's probably why Trinidad and Tobago is about the only country that has accepted some of these lesser, quote-unquote, lesser skilled persons.
But also,
under the CSME.
Bahamas, you can't go as an attorney and work in Bahamas.
No.
CMSC, unless you work with the
Well,
state.
Bahamas is not a member of the CSME, so.
But, but Bahamas is a part of Caricom.
It's a part of Caricom, but they're not part of the CSME.
Right? And I mean, look at that thing with, one of the problems they have which came out of that judgment recently with the Jamaican lady.
Myri.
Right. One of the issues that some countries are saying is that people have been going in, they assume they can go in and work for 6 months automatically. And there's a fear so that when there was a discussion on it, and which one country raised was that if I'm a small person with about 80 of us in this country, I'm just using that as and you are bigger, and about 100 of you comes into my country where there's 8 of us, you change, basically you can basically change the culture of a place. You understand what I'm saying? There's a fear with the smaller countries within the Caribbean of the influx of of other countries who can export.
Do you think that's a well-founded fear?
I think it depends on, the country that raised it. That is their fear. We live in Trinidad, where we are one of the bigger countries within
Who raised
Caricom.
it, Antigua and Barbuda? How did I know? So it's certain type of workers that Antigua and Barbuda allows. They won't allow certain quote-unquote unskilled workers from Caricom, but they will allow quote-unquote unskilled workers from the Dominican Republic. There's a whole Dominican colony in Antigua and Barbuda, but they're not willing to implement these elements of the CSME for the movement of persons.
If one looks at the European Union, remember, 60 years ago, they were bombing the living daylights out of each other. Okay, the Germans against the French and the British and so on. And now, any European within the EU can move freely, whether you are skilled, unskilled, disabled, whether you're a Jew, doesn't matter. You can move freely amongst European countries. Literally drive through the border. I've done it. And it is extraordinary to think that, 60 years ago, I would never have just driven into Germany. But the point I want to make is we've never had those wars and so on. Apart from perhaps with cricket, but generally speaking, we don't. And yet, these are things that, in a way, they self-regulate. Because if you're saying, okay, I think it should be any Caribbean citizen within CARICOM should be able to work anywhere in the Caribbean, I think. And, okay, you may say, okay, well, we're going to have an influx of Guyanese or St. Lucians or Kititians or whatever it might be. Fair enough, but then our workers can go and work there. And there's opportunities in tourism that we don't have here, opportunities in financial services to build those sectors in other islands. If there is free movement of people, it self-regulates in a way. And I know they've had problems in Europe with unskilled workers becoming beggars and some of the, a lot of the East Germans moving into what was formerly West Germany and so on. But it does regulate itself in a sense, and the jobs are provided. And if you're saying we're only going to bring in a certain category of person, you're discriminating. And I don't think that is a philosophy as Caribbean people. We've lived through discrimination, we got rid of it, and now we're reimposing it.
I saw an article where I think the English is now looking at that problem. It's becoming a problem for the English, and they are looking to see, you know, how it's going to work, because apparently a lot of Eastern Europe are flocking to London, and there's a problem there. So it is a problem there now. Yes, they did it, but now I think the English are, there was an article, like someone give it to me based on, we were looking at the same issue of freedom of movement, and they got an article where the English is looking at that question now.
It's become a problem to the Conservative government. Wasn't as much a problem to the Labour government before.
But the English are not looking at it now.
They're right, no,
Right?
you're right, you're right. But
And also,
there's
too,
also the politics.
in terms of movement, you forget, at the end of the day, when you have workers coming in, unskilled workers and all that, it's going to be a burden on your social services, like it or not. And we all know how our social services are
But
here.
let me just counter that argument. Being English and having lived in London, I have experienced what you're describing, but I also want to share with you that some of the best opportunities for ICT development, new emerging economies are in Eastern Europe, former Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, these places, and there are hundreds of British professionals working and building enterprises in Eastern Europe, training locals, so those people can then be employed in their own country. So it regulates. When you open the doors, it regulates. There's always initial teething problems, if you want, but it regulates itself, and we provide opportunities in those countries. So, sorry, I know this is completely off topic, but I just think
this is exactly on topic.
I really feel that Caribbean, it should be, I mean, once you're not a convicted serial killer, you should be able to move and look for opportunity legally. I'm not talking about illegal work, but legally and honestly find employment, not begging, not government support social work, but legal employment.
A show of hands. What about them?
There are people too.
Haiti is soon to be part of the CSME. So soon we may have that possibility of more Haitians coming here. Is that a problem for you? Oh. Okay, so let's have a show of hands. How many people favor the expansion of the categories into all categories of persons, as is the case in Europe? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And the others, and who has concerns about that? Couple.
At the end of the day, we will see the effects, the social effects of whatever will come down to government having to deal with it. You know, and there will be social effects of it. Is nobody hospital bad yet? You didn't say it yet, because at the end of the day, if our system, the question is, can our system handle that? Can our social system handle that?
It can. I mean, we have the case recently of this Guyanese gentleman who unfortunately died.
I just wanted to stir the pot up a bit more.
Okay, some more pot stir.
The Caribbean opened a window through Cricket World Cup 2007.
Yeah.
We opened a window.
Yes.
And somewhere in all of this, money can buy everything, but I'm speaking from a perspective of where we were when we were inviting them in to build the stadia across the Caribbean.
Yes.
And where we are now. Rather than us looking at intra-Caribbean threats, we need to seriously pay attention to the longer-term effects that are just now manifesting themselves.
Like?
Some for good, some for bad.
Like, for example?
I don't think they're being regulated either. We don't see them as major threats because they are not in the legal field, they're not in the whatever field, but by sheer numbers, we are being overwhelmed. In 2007, most islands opened to come in. And we need to look at somewhere in all of this, perhaps at another forum, to look at it. Not because they're coming in with those kinds of monies. There are some similar population influences that are now occurring that are not being documented. I can only give a general example. In Jamaica at the time, we were trying to process them through the Ministry of National Security. but the similarity in names, features, whatever, it was real difficult to find out who had actually left after they had built the stadium. In the deepest, most rural areas that draws very little attention, they are coming in. And once they move in, they're affecting real estate prices. Where I'm living now, I'm seeing it. So the locals perhaps won't take a property at $3,000 a month because we can't afford it.
Right.
But somebody else will take it at $6,000. And because of how they live so densely, per capita, it is a reasonable amount because they live in a dense manner so they can get economies of scale. So somewhere in all of this, rather than these kinds of things, we are looking at that further down the road. And I look at, perhaps again, as I say, we can learn from them. And they operate completely self-contained units. So if you stay long enough, everybody comes out of the kitchen and takes a mop. So normally where you'd have a local employed to do the janitorial services, they're totally, so they come in and they do make an economic impact.
They do make an economic
At
input.
the financing level.
Right.
But you're not going to see more people being employed. You're not going to see the shopkeeper perhaps might not get more sales because they don't eat what they sell. So it's that kind of thing that down the road we will need to look at because it will.
So maybe the shopkeeper should try to import to sell what the customers are buying.
Well, as I say, in terms of that kind of effect, so it will come up later on. Perhaps it's still early days, but for the countries that they have been there for a longer time than just 2-3 years, you need to look at that because that too affects how the economy goes or it does not go.
Absolutely.
May I just make one comment? And I hear what you're saying, but I just want to be clear. What I'm talking about is people coming into a country where they have employment offers. That's what I'm talking about. Whether you're unskilled, whether you're a housekeeper, working in a KFC, whatever it is, there has to be employment. I'm not just talking about thousands of people coming with no jobs, but I'm saying that the opportunities for employment should be expanded to everyone. And you have to arrive with a job offer and legitimate employment.
I quite agree. I was just saying that in the midst of all of this, and there are certain positions, this is also one that I've seen. For example, we don't learn as a region from each other. When the Koreans came to put in our superhighway, the signs were in Korean. The signs were in Korean because the signs came. The signs came with the project.
Yeah, it speaks to the need to regulate.
So, in terms of that, we need to, I'm just saying for the people who influence policies and all of that, we need to put that kind, and remember the world is expanding. And we're getting smaller as a world. So we just need to somewhere in all of this to just put some sort of consideration.
Yes, absolutely. And this is not an academic discussion. Stacey, this has come up at recent Cont'd meetings that you've attended?
It's actually never been discussed from the perspective that Delisa brought it forward, which is that the country is having concerns about being flooded, with citizens or residents from other Caricom countries. It was from the other perspective, which is that, I'm just using Trinidad and Tobago as an example. Trinidad and Tobago is expanding. They have a lot of opportunities. Why can't our citizens go there to seek further and better opportunities? So the smaller member states tend to look at it in a positive light, and then, the bigger member states, we pretty much just stay silent.
Okay. Thanks. So this is, as I say, it's an ongoing discussion. Right now, though, when you enter a Caribbean country in order to provide your service, you're supposed to be given a 6-month entry.
Okay, one example. I can come in here and stay from January to June 29, go back home for 2 days and come back in. Am I allowed automatically back in for 6 months? Is that what was the essence of the spirit of the agreement? So I think the discussions are now going toward what was the spirit of the agreement and how practical, if you look at that judgment, how practical some of the things raised in that judgment is really, or how practical in terms of the working out of it, especially for the small Caricom nations where there are little resources and there, for instance, in a country where nobody wants to go, right. Certain things raised. You could put, as somebody said, you could put one man in an office, and he will get about 4 or 5 persons coming through that region, right? But in other regions where there's a high flow of passengers through, you may find that you need to put resources where some Caricom country just doesn't have the resources. Mm-hmm. Also, to the impact of some of the parts mentioned in the judgment. How is it going to work out? I think one of the things that you need to be able to go and see a judge. So do we need to put a courthouse next to the Piaco airport? Mm-hmm. And things like that. How reasonable some of those issues raised in the judgment are going to be. And I think the discussion now is basically that. How reasonable this is in a practical working this is going to be. Mm-hmm. Whether or not it leads to a whole revisit. I think might lead to a revisit of that whole
of the whole system of movement.
No, of the freedom of movement per se, the freedom of movement aspect. Because when that came about at the conference level, level, right? Yes. With all the technocrats being around, right? A lot of the outworking of it was never really discussed until this Chennai incident happened, right? Now the Chennai incident happened, and the court has ruled on it. The Caricom Caribbean Court of Appeal have ruled on it. There are certain things stated by the court there that the country may have to, as you say, implement or revisit.
Yes.
Whether there's but I think it's going to be difficult for a lot of the country, even us, to implement what the court stated in the judgment. I don't know how many people here have read the judgment in detail, and it's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, Stacey.
The judgment was very specific, and it did say, that they are entitled to the automatic 6 months, but there are a number of stipulations that came with that. You had to prove X, Y, and Z, And most of the Caricom member states, especially at the border points, immigration and whatnot, they don't have the capacity to implement those specifics. So that is something that was not foreseen when even in the initial stages when the discussion was taking place, and this is even before the Shanik Myrie case came up, So I believe Trinidad and Tobago and maybe one other member state had objected to it initially, and it was because it was for that same reason. We kind of foresaw that it would be difficult to implement. That wasn't thought out,
So, when you look at that judgment, it will take, because you're looking at retraining, and the judgment talks about retraining immigration staff.
Yes.
But there must be standardization across the board.
Yeah. Okay. So,
for example, I hold a certification as a fire inspector, and in order to maintain my certification every 3 years, I have to take certain courses which have continuing education units.
Yes.
Now, one of the trainings I did previously was for first aid. So I did the Red Cross program, and that gave me a certain number of CEUs towards my recertification. Mm-hmm. Now I'm doing the first aid here. I'm actually doing more hours, right? But the course isn't going to doesn't meet
the requirements. Yeah.
It meets the equivalent.
Yeah.
But it is not under the NC ISO 9001 standardized, whatever it is.
ISO 9001.
So that I can take the hours that I spend doing that training here, which is excellent, real top professional training course, and use it.
But it's not going to give you the
to apply to my training.
And then this is another issue in trading services, and it's an issue in implementing the CSME that Caricom is trying to work on. How do we standardize all these procedures, or at least make them equivalent, not necessarily similar, identical, but equivalent?
Because another thing was that someone would say they went into a Caribbean country and they didn't get 6 months, right? At a meeting, people were saying, well, I got a week, you know, and they realized that even with the 6 months entry, persons that was going to a particular meeting, they got various times of entry.
I travel a lot.
You know, nobody got
never
6
got
months.
6 months.
Never got 6 months, yeah. You know? And we had about, okay, so even something simple as that, stamping 6 months on a passport is a problem.
Yeah.
How are you going to really implement the other areas?
But as an economic operator,
I
it
think
is
we
your
can
right
agree-
to ask for
I think we
that.
can agree, though, that uniformly, if you're looking at standardization, uniformity, they're uniformly miserable across the region. Whatever island you go to,
Yes.
customs and immigration are miserable. So at least we've achieved that as a form of a standard.
But absolutely, and that, we're talking about some of the issues in implementing a single market and economy, which is the highest level of integration that you can do. And it's what we're not trying to do at any other level of these agreements. But one point to remember is that it doesn't, even if you get access, it doesn't give you the right to practice a profession. You can't, you're a lawyer, you cannot go to Barbados under the skills certificate and then practice as a lawyer. You still need to meet the requirements in place under the bar in Barbados, for example. And that is, no. That is a continuing issue within Caricom as well, because Caricom is trying to develop, Caricom Secretariat is trying to develop a model professionals bill. One of the issues is that the Secretariat is taking a much wider approach to defining what a professional is than is normally accepted internationally.
Emerging professions, so law, medicine are the traditional, architects, engineering would be traditional and probably regulated. But there are so many emerging and new professions within ICT and so on that are not even classified in some cases. They're very new.
Well, that's a challenge, and the problem is there's no international, common understanding internationally about what it is. We have the regulated professions, those are ones which are regulated by law, but then as you say, developing, in our negotiations with Canada, one of the things we're doing last couple of weeks was looking at Canada's national occupational classification and seeing what the categories of persons within financial services that they identified as professionals within the financial services sector. And the US has a different understanding. Certainly we in Caricom have a different understanding as to what's a professional within financial services, health, and other professions. So it is a continuing and ongoing discussion at the national level, regionally, and in our international negotiations, undecided. But we don't need a work permit. So once you get in, once you're providing services in Caricom, you're not required to get a work permit. Now, this is very different from what we did with Europe in the Economic Partnership Agreement. In the Economic Partnership Agreement, Europeans still require a work permit in order to provide services here. Dwight needed a work permit when he started to play up in England. And you will still require a work permit if you try to provide certain services in Europe for certain periods of time. And we're going to talk about that. That's very vague, I know, but the reality is that that's the negotiations. In the EPA, we had the CARIFORUM countries, which comprise CARICOM, including the Bahamas, which is not part of the CSME, but they're part of CARICOM. Haiti, which is not yet part of the CSME, but they're part of CARICOM. And the Dominican Republic, which is not part of CARICOM or the CSME, but for the purpose of this negotiation, they were part of this group, the Caribbean Forum, that negotiated this agreement with Europe. Problems with that is that some elements of the EPA provide for equal treatment. So the EPA says, for example, with respect to management consulting, that if the Dominican Republic has given to the Europe access for management consultants, then Caribbean, the rest of us, should get the same treatment. The problem is we don't have the framework, or within the CARIFORUM, within our negotiations with the Dominican Republic to make that a reality. So even though this is a part of the agreement, we haven't implemented that as yet. And that is a big positive for Caribbean service providers because the Dominican Republic actually has the most extensive liberalization commitments of any CARIFORUM country. And so it'd be useful for us if we want to trade with them to benefit from that better access, particularly since our Caricom Dominican Republic agreement doesn't include services. But we can't do so yet because the member states and the DR haven't agreed how to make this happen. I agree, I'm shaking my head too. SMH, about this whole thing. No, to me, it's more than ridiculous. I think that to me, it goes back to that previous discussion. If you have a will to do something, then you're going to cope with the ups and downs of it. But we don't have a will to implement, and but we're still studying this at the regional level to see how we can make this happen.
And yet meanwhile, business carries on. Business and trade goes on in spite of governments.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't wait for us to negotiate an agreement, as we spoke about at the beginning. But anyhow, having negotiated an agreement with Europe, we do say we have made some openings in mostly a number of professional services areas. This is particularly in relation to our commitments as individual countries at the WTO. So we've made it easier generally for Europeans to provide architecture, engineering, R&D, etc., management, entertainment services, environmental services within CARICOM than they would normally be required to. But on the other hand, we've been able to gain from the EU access for a number of persons providing services, that mode 4 that we talked about, for certain categories of professions and services. Yeah? Right. Yeah. So if you're an independent professional and you're providing advice, you're providing legal advice to our EU company on accessing the market in CARICOM, you're good to go. No. Which is possible. Which is your area? It's the area where there's supposed to be the most capability. No. There are more lawyers that know about Caribbean law than know about German law in the Caribbean. So in principle, this should be an area where more likely there's going to be exporting. Right. Because remember, to provide this non-EU legal advice doesn't mean that you're providing non-EU law services, because you still have to qualify according to the rules in place in Europe. But you can provide certain types of advice.
Can I ask a question about, you say there are no quotas, but I know in a lot of European countries, particularly the northern states like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and so on, they do have quotas with regards to number of women on their boards, representation of minorities in bidding and contracts. Is that part of the EPA? If we're trading with European firms, do we have to meet some of those standards to ensure that minorities or women are represented in our firms?
No and yes. No, in the sense that there aren't any numerical limitations on that, but yes, in the sense that some countries, these are some examples for France. So it's quite possible that, say, for Sweden might say that if you're working in insurance, there may be restrictions on the number of non-Swedish members of the board that you could have if you want to establish a company to provide services in Sweden. It's quite possible that a commitment is in place, but there aren't any limitations on the numbers of service providers.
It is stated. I know if you trade with the US government, it's clearly stated that they give preference to firms which employ minorities, women, differently abled, and so on. Is that stated in here as preference would be given, perhaps in a contract bidding or so on?
With respect to these persons, independent professionals and contractual service suppliers, it's stated that in these areas, they're committed to provide access in these areas. Now, if you're providing tax advice, but not financial planning advice or whatever, then if you're providing financial planning advice, then you're not included under this framework. So it's quite possible that a restriction or limitation might apply to you. You understand?
I'm just asking whether philosophically, in the EPA, there is a requirement, regardless of the sector or discipline that you're in, whether the European Union requires Trinidad or CARIFORUM firms to, whether they, if 3 or 4 of us are bidding to provide services for private higher education, there's a tender, an RFP and so on, they would give preference to firms that represent women, minorities, differently able, only because I know as a philosophy, that happens in Europe.
Yeah, not a preference. Not within the EPA.
It's not, okay, that's all I'm asking.
Not within the EPA.
Does the CSME give any relief to individuals? Does the CSME give any relief to individuals where there is a challenge under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities? For example, cannot sue a government specifically, but if you enter into a business opportunity in, say, Jamaica, and you spend substantial amounts of money trying to get things established, and in the end, they won't allow you into the country for something, so that now you've suffered
Well, there
significant
you have
losses.
recourse to the Caribbean Court of Justice. The CCJ is the ultimate arbiter of matters relating to the operation of the single market and economy. And that's why this Myri case, for example, went to the CCJ. So as an operator, you do have access.
So that
Sorry?
It does give the individual access to seek a remedy from a foreign government.
From other CARICOM government, yeah. Yeah. So in that case, for example, the government of Barbados had to pay Myri something like $100,000. They haven't paid as yet, as far as I know. Last thing I heard. But so yeah, there is recourse to individuals and corporations. So for example, one of the recent cases at the CCJ was won by TCL against a CARICOM provision that it said affected its ability to trade within a particular market. And that resulted in changes being made to the way certain actions are taken with respect to goods. So the EPA also provides access for key personnel. Those are persons involved in the administration of an investment. So if you do invest in an EU company in some kind of way, or in France, business services sellers, and provides access for graduate trainees. If you're a trainee working at a particular company, then you can, you do have certain benefits. I'll make this slide available. I should have sent it to Maria for circulation, but this just summarizes the access under these areas for persons seeking to provide services or within the EU. Contractual services suppliers, what is defined as, the type of stay, and the kind of conditions, some of the conditions that you might meet, because you might still be required to meet other conditions depending on the kind of categorization you fall under.
Are there any study arrangements for CARICOM citizens wanting to study in Europe, not work? I know there was that agreement in England with the work. Is that part of the EPA at all for study?
I'll say not specifically, because part of the element of graduate trainees is that you're going to we as CARICOM wanted to expand that as much as possible to include learning outside of a link with a specific enterprise. Weren't able to do that, so the link is still relating to work that a trainee, a graduate will undertake within the company that they're employed with in Europe. In the area of cultural cooperation, I'm going to go forward a bit. The area of cultural cooperation, there is an element of learning. There's a provision, there's an agreement on cultural cooperation within the EPA, which is the first time Europe has agreed to provisions on culture, quote unquote, in a trade agreement. The cooperation elements provide for, for exchange visits, study visits, etc., by certain providers of cultural services, the persons in the cultural area. And it also provides, which is critical and which we as a region haven't really taken advantage of enough of yet. It also provides for access to the European audiovisual market under certain circumstances. So if you're a film producer and you enter into a co-production, an agreement with you enter into an agreement with a financier in the UK, under the EPA, in principle, your output, the film, should qualify as a European product. Now there's some provisos to that, but generally, and there's some requirements that need to be put in place. But that's the idea. That's the first time that the EU has actually included any type of commitment for access into the audiovisual sector in a trade agreement. It's a small bit, but it can be potentially important. Time's running. But again, you might still, in seeking to export your services to Europe, the agreement does require the Europeans to say where they employ economic needs tests, sometimes called labor market tests or labor certification tests, or the same kind of tests that our Ministry of National Security engages if a foreigner wants to enter the market and work. Those are still in place. The EU will say in their schedule where these are in place for the specific service. So when you're checking for your specific service, you'll be able to see whether, if you want to provide this service in Germany or the UK, you'll see whether they have a requirement for an economic needs test in order for you to provide that service. But at least it's listed. And that goes back to what we said earlier about one of the benefits of these trade agreements, the fact that it's just out there. It's more easily viewable and that to economic operators seeking to do business. But our people have identified a number of issues in trying to access Europe post-EPA. I've indicated some of these here. It's more, a lot of them have difficulty finding the right person to interact with. They complain about lack of information, specific information about accessing the market, so going deeper than what's in these agreements. So for example, the mass sector, the carnival sector is looking to do a trade mission to Europe. One of the things they're doing is trying to go deeper than what the commitments are in the EPA to see exactly what they need to do in order to access the market. You may have seen that cultural entertainment services are one of the areas facilitated as an independent, as a contractual service supplier under the EPA. So, but you need to go deeper to say exactly what you need to do when I reach the Netherlands if I want to provide services related to Carnival there. So that's the kind of thing that, unfortunately, you need to do. In principle, there's support available from Export TT, which does all its market surveys, et cetera, and which has done several projects on accessing the European market. Of course, other associations such as the Chamber and TTCSI have also been involved in seeking to expand opportunities for their members into the European market. So there is support available. But inevitably, you do have to go through all the hoops, You do need to go through all those steps in order to provide services in Europe. And inevitably, we will say that perhaps there are too many. But the converse of that is that these are the same steps that are required of Europeans seeking to provide services within Europe. Nothing different. And that's one of the benefits of this agreement. We can be sure that we're doing the same thing as a European would, seeking to enter. These services schedules are available on this website. If you're looking at a particular market, you can go to this particular website and look for your specific service, the restrictions that are in place. There are opportunities in Latin America too, in North America. We haven't negotiated any services agreement with Latin America. I don't think we're planning to do so. But certainly with respect to North America, we have ongoing negotiations with Canada, which are supposed to be almost finished, but which still have several key areas to be addressed. In services, we basically need to determine how we're treating with financial services, because the sector within the region is very hesitant to include provisions on financial services based on this heavy Canadian involvement here at the moment. And then we also need to determine services, how we're going to liberalize. The Canadians have one approach, we have one approach, and the two don't meet. And then finally, we need to look at the level of ambition, as they say, that we have for this agreement. How open are we going to be? How open do we expect them to be? From their point of view, they're saying we're an open book, Because you can look at our previous agreements, we're not giving you any less than we've given anybody else. And in fact, because we've signed agreements just signed an agreement with South Korea and signed one with Europe that are going to be implemented shortly, you're actually going to get better treatment than was available to other countries at the beginning of your agreement, But on the other hand, Caricom is saying that you need at the same time not to expect as much from us. The Canadians have, to me, shown some openness in saying that they're not expecting the same level of commitment from St. Kitts as they are from Trinidad and Tobago. But that still poses some issues for some CARICOM countries. So we're supposed to finish those negotiations by June. I'm doubtful that we'll make that deadline. There are too many difficult questions to be answered, and I think the unwillingness of CARICOM member states to take those hard decisions. But nonetheless, all things, if we're optimistic, by next year, service providers from Trinidad and Tobago could have better access to Canada than they do at the moment. And along the lines, in fact, even better in a number of services than is presently available into Europe. And it's probably even more relevant because of the proximity of Canada, the strong linkages that many of us have there. It's probably potentially of much greater value to us than some of the commitments that we've negotiated previously with Europe. We're not doing anything yet with the USA. Ryan's organization is trying to ensure that trying to see if we can get preferential services access into the USA, so we wouldn't have to provide that same access to our market as USA provides to us. Ryan, I don't know if you want to give an update on where you are with that. Hold on. Share, man, share.
It's called SOCA. The initiative is called SOCA, Services of the Caribbean. And what SOCA is about is trying to get the CBI legislation changed to include services or incorporate services. When I say CBI, this is the Caribbean Basin Initiative. Because when the CBI came about in 1980, before I was born, whenever it was, 84 I think, what came out of it is that it was, at the time, the Caribbean was a goods-based economy. But now most CARICOM states are services-based. And granted, the US market is pretty much open to not just CARICOM, Caribbean service providers. What the TTCSI is trying to do is trying to get the US market open in a legal sense so that even if you're at the border, you could be turned back for anything, whether you're a drug smuggler, whatever the case may be, but you won't get turned back for providing a service to the USA. But we're not just trying to change the CBI legislation. We're looking at that. We're looking at trade facilitation, and we are looking at, there's a consultancy in the US that we're teaming up with called Manchester Trade, and what they're doing is lobbying to Congress on the Caribbean's behalf. And from what I understand, more or less every congressman that they have approached, I can't give you a number, but a fair amount, more than half of them, have all voiced their support of the initiative. Voicing it and getting that in writing, of course, are two different things. But thus far, it looks very promising. And the TTCSI is going to go to COTAD next month to give a presentation on the initiative and to get government support, Caribbean support, CARICOM support. So we'll see how it goes. Stacey will let us know how it goes because Stacey's going and I'm not.
I think it's also important to add that most of the chambers of commerce are supporting this initiative, aren't they? Locally.
The US chambers of commerce in the Caribbean are supporting it, and the other chambers, actually the co-chair of the initiative is the Chamber of Commerce, the US chamber in Jamaica, and the American Chamber of Commerce here in Trinidad are one of our members. But the other chambers, just like the Congress in the States, they have voiced their support.
But we've talked about, time is running on us, but I think today what I hope that you've got from our discussion are the opportunities available, but also some of the challenges available, some of the things that we try to address through these trade agreements, and also some ideas about some opportunities that may arise to you in order to try to access these agreements. Finally, also, just to say that I think that there is, in fact, significant support available to you as service providers if you want to try to export your services, not only export TT, but primarily export TT with their new mandate, of course, but the chambers, the TTCSI, the American Chamber, the TT Chamber, Energy Chamber, if you're in that area, or even the Bankers Association. Many of these associations now have trade capabilities that are able to support your exporting interests. So there is support available to you, and I really urge you to try to take advantage of it. Thanks very much for all your participation today and the learning. Thank you.